You people always complain. The words didn't come out loud. They didn't need to. Just loud enough for three people in first class to glance up from their seats. Just loud enough for Dr. Celeste Monroe's linen napkin to slide, almost imperceptibly, from her lap to the floor. The flight attendant, Rebecca, according to her name tag, stood with one hip cocked, tray in hand, face blank. A single brow raised in challenge. Not one apology in sight. The tray in front of Celeste held a plate of grilled chicken, or at least it pretended to. Bloody juice had pooled beneath the meat, soaking the rice. The center was visibly pink, nearly raw. "Is there a problem?" Rebecca asked, her voice flat, rehearsed. But the corners of her mouth curled. Not quite a smile, more like disdain. Celeste didn't flinch. Her eyes, deep and unreadable, stayed on the chicken. "Have you ever paid for the best, only to be treated like the worst? Tell us where you're watching from." "I asked for a meal, not a health hazard," Celeste said quietly. Rebecca crossed her arms. "It's prepared to airline standards." Celeste tilted her head. "Which includes salmonella?" Rebecca gave a clipped laugh. "Maybe it's just not what you're used to. We don't serve fast food here." Across the aisle, a suited man shifted uncomfortably. A younger woman in earbuds looked up, eyes narrowing. Celeste slowly folded her napkin, set it on the tray. "Can I speak to your in-flight service director?" "I'm the lead on this flight," Rebecca replied, then added with mock politeness, "Doctor." There it was, the bite beneath the sweetness. Celeste held her gaze, calm, composed. "Then you may want to remember who you're speaking to," Rebecca scoffed. "And you might want to remember where you are." She leaned closer. "You think first class makes you special?" She didn't wait for a reply. The tray stayed. The pink chicken sat like an insult on porcelain. Celeste didn't touch it again. She didn't eat. She didn't argue. She reached into the leather pouch beside her seat, pulled out her phone. No one saw the app she opened. No one saw her thumbprint scan. Her face didn't change. Veritas Internal. Immediate action protocols. Target. Skyline Air Tier. 1. Action. Freeze credit access. 3 branch networks amount. $2.4 billion. She tapped send. 5 minutes later, Skyline Air's fuel card authorization systems failed across 3 time zones. Scheduled aircraft maintenance contracts were returned with insufficient funds. Payroll pings began failing. At Altus and Nova, subsidiary airlines under the same liquidity umbrella, panic trickled in through encrypted Slack messages. Celeste folded her hands in her lap. Across the aisle, the man in the navy suit leaned in. "Ma'am, are you okay?" She offered a small, elegant smile. "I am now." Then she picked up a book, Designing Systems That Can't Discriminate. She turned the page. Rebecca didn't come back for a long while, and when she did, it wasn't to apologize. It was to say they were experiencing a temporary issue with meal service. Celeste looked up, nodded once. "You may want to call your corporate liaison," she said. "They'll need a revised vendor list soon." Rebecca blinked. "What?" But Celeste was already back to reading. The untouched meal, slowly cooling on real china, stayed exactly where it was. Like a warning. 30,000 feet in the air. The turbulence wasn't coming from the clouds. The first alert popped up on a tablet in the cockpit. Not unusual. A fuel payment bounce. Could be a glitch. But 2 minutes later, the co-pilot's comm lit up with a code red from operations. Captain?" the co-pilot said slowly. "They're telling us Skyline's corporate accounts are bouncing across 3 service hubs. Maintenance, refuel, even tower clearance checks." Captain Hargrove didn't respond right away. He adjusted his headset. "Get corporate on the line. We don't land until this is cleared." Meanwhile, back in first class, Rebecca leaned against the galley wall, staring at her phone. Her fingers hovered over the screen as more and more notifications rolled in. "Why's our payroll portal down?" One message read. "Meal vendor just canceled. What's going on?" Another pinged. She scrolled further. All Skyline vendor lines frozen. Veritas Capital pulled liquidity. Her heart dropped. She stormed back into the cabin, passing Celeste without a word. She reached the purser phone, punched in a code. Her hands trembled slightly. "Ground, this is Flight 722. We need executive operations now. Something's wrong with payroll, vendor lines, everything." There was silence. Then static. Then, "We're aware of the situation. Stand by." Stand by? That was all they were going to say? Passengers in first class began murmuring. The suited man leaned toward Celeste again. "Excuse me, did something happen?" Celeste smiled faintly. They're just realizing who they served undercooked food to. At the same time, halfway across the country, in Veritas's Denver office tower, two analysts stared at a flashing dashboard. "All Tier 1 protocols activated," one whispered. "Credit freeze executed, 2.4B locked down." The other analyst turned, pale. "Did Dr. Monroe initiate?" A pause. "Yeah," the first one nodded. "She sent the order herself. It's real." In the boardroom, legal counsel had already gathered. The CFO of Skyline, who had been on a golf course an hour earlier, was now scrambling for a secure video link. "How bad is it?" he barked. "Terminal," said one compliance officer. Back on the plane, Rebecca returned to first class, stiff as glass. "Dr. Monroe," she said through clenched teeth, "our team has informed me that there may have been a disruption in service. I apologize." Celeste tilted her head. Rebecca went on, barely able to speak the words. "If there's anything we can offer to make it right." Celeste looked up from her book. "You could start by acknowledging what you said." Rebecca froze. "I didn't mean..." "You meant exactly what you said," Celeste replied. "And now you're realizing it wasn't just rude. It was stupid." Celeste held up a hand. "We'll speak again, after landing." Rebecca didn't move. "Dismissed," Celeste said. Calm, flat. It wasn't just a word. It was a statement of hierarchy. Rebecca stepped back like she'd been slapped. The flight landed on time. But as the plane taxied, airport staff flurried around the jet bridge. Two operations officers boarded before the seatbelt sign was off. One handed Rebecca a sealed envelope. She read it. Her hands began to shake. "You're relieved of duty, effective immediately, pending internal review." She looked up at Celeste, who was standing now, blazer crisp, eyes unreadable. Outside the window, a Skyline branded fuel truck was being redirected. Inside, Dr. Monroe's quiet revolution had just begun. The moment Flight 722 touched down, the entire landscape of Skyline Air began to crack. First silently, then like thunder. Celeste Monroe didn't rush. As the other first-class passengers unbuckled and reached for their bags, she remained seated, composed, watching the cabin crew scramble through tightly clenched smiles. She had no interest in the fake pleasantries now being tossed her way. Coffee refills, dessert offers, sudden warmth that reeked of fear. Rebecca, the lead flight attendant, avoided her eyes entirely. The flight had landed, but something deeper hadn't. Not yet. Outside the aircraft window, Celeste could see the unusual movement of personnel at the terminal. Two men in dark suits with Veritas credentials, an airport operations official pacing on a headset, and a branded Skyline air manager breaking into a sweat despite the mild LA weather. Celeste finally stood, calm, controlled. She stepped into the aisle just as a member of the airport operations team boarded the flight, bypassing everyone and heading straight to the galley where Rebecca was stationed. He handed her a sealed envelope. The cabin fell silent. Rebecca opened it, her hands trembling. Her lips moved slightly as she read. Celeste walked by her slowly, pausing just long enough to say in a low voice, "I told you we'd speak again after landing." Rebecca couldn't look up. She didn't have to. The envelope was a formal suspension notice, issued by Skyline's Internal Review Board, expedited by an external ethics alert from Veritas Capital Holdings, effective immediately. By the time Celeste exited the plane, The first phone calls had already started flooding into Skyline's executive floor. Back in Veritas headquarters in Chicago, a war room had formed. It was rare for Celeste Monroe to pull the Tier 1 trigger personally, even more rare for her to do it from a flight. But when she did, the machine moved, and fast. Inside the 47th floor conference room, screens lit up with dashboards showing frozen vendor lines, paused leasing agreements, and suspended credit facilities across multiple Skyline operations. One junior analyst whispered, "They're bleeding hard." Celeste's longtime legal advisor, Diana Granger, entered the room, eyes sharp. "We have enough to proceed," she said. The racial misconduct alert was confirmed. Meal quality violations? Verified. And the internal culture audit you flagged last year? You were right. There's rot all the way through their mid-management ranks. Celeste nodded once, unbothered. "Then we go public by next week." Diana hesitated. "You want to make the acquisition announcement that fast?" "No," Celeste said, calmly. "I want them to know who's been quietly buying them for 6 months." The room froze. A younger associate blinked. "You mean Veritas already owns 48%, Celeste said. "By Friday, we'll control 51. She walked to the far window and looked out at the skyline. Fittingly, they embarrassed me on my own turf. In a cabin I helped fund. They've treated black travelers, elderly passengers, women with accents, all as liabilities instead of customers. She turned back to the team. "Skyline will be reborn," she said, "or buried. Either way, by my hand." Meanwhile, chaos rippled through Skyline's boardroom in New York. The CFO had flown in overnight. The COO's face was pale. Their phones wouldn't stop buzzing. "Who is she?" one executive demanded. "Why didn't compliance flag this?" "She's Veritas," muttered another. "She's the damn chairwoman of their Aviation Ethics Council." "She was," someone barked. "She stepped down 2 quarters ago." "To buy us," someone else said quietly. Then the dam broke. Investors started calling. One by one, major capital partners, hedge funds, banks, even leasing firms, pulled back. An emergency shareholder meeting was called for Monday. It was only Wednesday. Celeste's return to Chicago wasn't flashy. She didn't speak to the press. She didn't post anything on social media. But news outlets caught wind within 24 hours. Veritas Capital freezes 2.4B credit to Skyline Air. Sources say strategic acquisition in play. Flight to fallout. CEO Monroe may oust entire executive team at Skyline. Celeste didn't care for headlines. What mattered was structure and accountability. On Friday morning, she entered the newly acquired Skyline executive building under full confidentiality. She stepped into the 14th floor and requested the entire cabin services division meet her in conference room 3B. They thought she was just a representative from Veritas. Until she walked to the front of the room, looked each person in the eye, and said, "My name is Dr. Celeste Monroe. As of 9 a.m. today, I am the principal owner of this airline." A gasp rippled through the room. Some rose instinctively. Others turned pale. Rebecca, who had been quietly reinstated pending formal apology training, sat in the back, trying to hide her face. Celeste continued, "I know what you think first class means. I know what you've said to the elderly, to children, to people who look like me. That ends now." She held up a slim black binder. "This is called the Flight Justice Index. It will become the new industry standard for cabin crew ethics and accountability. Your job security will no longer depend on seniority or charm. It will depend on how you treat those without power." She let the silence land, and then, just as calmly, added, "If you can't live up to that, you will be dismissed permanently." No one spoke. Outside, the sun was rising behind the skyline. Inside, a new flight path had just been drawn. The marble floors of Skyline's headquarters glistened under the morning sun. But the mood inside was anything but bright. In a glass-walled boardroom on the 28th floor, 9 executives sat in pin-drop silence, staring at the glowing screen at the end of the room. On it was a headline they hoped, prayed, was fake. Veritas chairwoman acquires controlling stake in Skyline Air. Major restructuring imminent. The room reeked of desperation. Gregory Stanton, the COO, broke first. He slammed his fist on the polished oak table. Why weren't we informed of this? Where the hell was legal? Where was finance? We thought she was just another investor, the VP of Strategy muttered, sweating through his shirt. She was, growled another board member. Until yesterday. She was in first class just 3 days ago, someone else said under their breath. And then they all went quiet. 3 days ago, that damn flight. It wasn't just about a bad meal anymore. That flight, that one service misstep, served with racial condescension and followed by corporate arrogance, had triggered a chain reaction that would now unravel their empire. Downstairs in the Skyline press room, the media had gathered fast. Word had leaked overnight. Celeste Monroe was in the building. It wasn't just news. It was a reckoning. Cameras were rolling. Anchors were whispering. Someone had already dubbed the morning Skyline's Judgment Day. But Celeste didn't enter through the front. She arrived via the executive elevator, flanked by 2 Veritas general counsels. She wore no makeup. Her navy coat brushed clean against her black dress. Her presence made the walls feel too small. When she walked into the boardroom, no one stood. They were too stunned. "You've been quiet," she said softly, looking around the table. "Let me guess, you thought I'd sell my stake back." Silence. "I won't, and here's why." She placed a single sheet of paper in front of her. Her voice was calm, but sharp enough to cut glass. 3 days ago, I was served spoiled food by a crew that judged my skin before they asked my name. That wasn't the problem. Gregory flinched. The problem, she continued, was that when I filed a complaint, it disappeared. When I followed up, it was denied. And when Veritas asked your team about prior incidents, they stonewalled us. Your entire culture is designed to protect arrogance, not accountability. Someone exhaled shakily. Celeste leaned forward. "I now own 53.2% of Skyline Air." Mouths fell open. "And I intend to clean house." Gregory stood, his face burning red. "You don't understand this business." Celeste didn't flinch. "Correction, you don't understand your customer." She turned to the screen on the wall and tapped it once. A new slide appeared. Flight Justice Index. Mandatory ethics grading for all cabin and ground staff. "This is your new standard," she said. "If you serve passengers with decency, you'll thrive. If you serve them with entitlement, you're done." The CFO's voice cracked. "We'd lose 40% of our current crew." "Then replace them," Celeste replied flatly, "with people who remember what empathy looks like." While the board scrambled for damage control, Celeste moved faster. By noon, she had convened an emergency meeting with all major stakeholders, investors, leasing firms, regulators. "I'm not here to sink Skyline," she told them. "I'm here to reform it, but no change will be cosmetic." Then she unveiled her plan. A full audit of passenger complaints over the past 5 years. Public transparency dashboard tracking all cabin crew behavior scores. A customer council led by retired veterans, educators, and advocates to review dignity violations. "From now on," she said, "flying Skyline means being treated like a human being." One investor stood up. "Why are you doing this?" Celeste looked him in the eye. "Because I built Veritas to be a justice engine, not just a capital fund, and I'm tired of systems that punish humility and reward cruelty." The room was quiet. And then, one by one, hands rose in support. The ripple effect spread in hours. Other airlines, watching the news, started prepping their PR teams. Competitors scrambled to review their own complaint systems, quietly pulling records of past discrimination lawsuits. The FAA, facing public pressure, reopened talks about standardizing ethics grading across all carriers. And in the press, Celeste Monroe's face was everywhere. The woman who grounded an airline with one phone call. From disrespected to disruptor, the CEO behind aviation's new moral compass. But she didn't care about the coverage. She cared about Rebecca. At 4:17 p.m., Celeste entered the Skyline crew briefing room. Dozens of staff stood at attention, unsure why they were summoned. Rebecca was among them, pale, shaky, clutching a clipboard. Celeste walked straight to her. "You remember me?" Rebecca nodded stiffly. Celeste's tone was firm, but not cruel. "I'm not here to humiliate you," she said. "I'm here because what happened on that flight didn't begin with you, but it ended with you." Rebecca swallowed. "You weren't the worst I've seen, but you were the last I'll tolerate." Celeste handed her a letter. Voluntary resignation, with a guaranteed retraining scholarship, should she ever choose to start over. Rebecca began to tear up. Celeste didn't wait. She turned back to the crew. "I'm not here to clean up a mess. I'm here to make sure this place never gets dirty again." And with that, she left. That night, across America, an elderly couple in Detroit booked a ticket with Skyline for the first time in years. A disabled veteran in Arizona called to thank the new passenger advocacy office. A teenage girl from Oakland wrote a letter to Celeste saying, "My mom said you made it safe for us again. Thank you." Celeste read that letter on her balcony, holding her tea. No headline would ever capture what that moment meant. Not even a billion-dollar buyout could. Because this wasn't about power, this was about dignity restored. The marble floors of Skyline's headquarters glistened under the morning sun, but the mood inside was anything but bright. In a glass-walled boardroom on the 28th floor, 9 executives sat in pin-drop silence, staring at the glowing screen at the end of the room. On it was a headline they hoped, prayed, was fake. Veritas chairwoman acquires controlling stake in Skyline Air, major restructuring imminent. The room reeked of desperation. Gregory Stanton, the COO, broke first. He slammed his fist on the polished oak table. "Why weren't we informed of this? Where the hell was legal? Where was finance?" "We thought she was just another investor," the VP of strategy muttered, sweating through his shirt. "She was," growled another board member. "Until yesterday. She was in first class just 3 days ago," someone else said under their breath. And then they all went quiet. 3 days ago, that damn flight. It wasn't just about a bad meal anymore. That flight, that one service misstep, served with racial condescension and followed by corporate arrogance, had triggered a chain reaction that would now unravel their empire. Downstairs in the Skyline press room, the media had gathered fast. Word had leaked overnight. Celeste Monroe was in the building. It wasn't just news, it was a reckoning. Cameras were rolling, anchors were whispering. Someone had already dubbed the morning Skyline's Judgment Day. But Celeste didn't enter through the front. She arrived via the executive elevator, flanked by 2 Veritas general counsels. She wore no makeup. Her navy coat brushed clean against her black dress. Her presence made the walls feel too small. When she walked into the boardroom, no one stood. They were too stunned. "You've been quiet," she said softly, looking around the table. "Let me guess. You thought I'd sell my stake back." Silence. "I won't. And here's why." She placed a single sheet of paper in front of her. Her voice was calm, but sharp enough to cut glass. 3 days ago, I was served spoiled food by a crew that judged my skin before they asked my name. That wasn't the problem. Gregory flinched. "The problem," she continued, "was that when I filed a complaint, it disappeared. When I followed up, it was denied. And when Veritas asked your team about prior incidents, they stonewalled us. Your entire culture is designed to protect arrogance, not accountability." Someone exhaled shakily. Celeste leaned forward. "I now own 53.2% of Skyline Air." Mouths fell open. "And I intend to clean house." Gregory stood, his face burning red. "You don't understand this business." Celeste didn't flinch. "Correction, you don't understand your customer." She turned to the screen on the wall and tapped it once. A new slide appeared, Flight Justice Index, mandatory ethics grading for all cabin and ground staff. This is your new standard, she said. If you serve passengers with decency, you'll thrive. If you serve them with entitlement, you're done. The CFO's voice cracked. We'd lose 40% of our current crew. Then replace them, Celeste replied flatly, with people who remember what empathy looks like. While the board scrambled for damage control, Celeste moved faster. By noon, she had convened an emergency meeting with all major stakeholders, investors, leasing firms, regulators. I'm not here to sink Skyline, she told them. I'm here to reform it, but no change will be cosmetic. Then she unveiled her plan, a full audit of passenger complaints over the past 5 years. Public transparency dashboard tracking all cabin crew behavior scores. A customer council led by retired veterans, educators, and advocates to review dignity violations. From now on, she said, flying Skyline means being treated like a human being. One investor stood up. Why are you doing this? Celeste looked him in the eye. Because I built Veritas to be a justice engine, not just a capital fund. And I'm tired of systems that punish humility and reward cruelty. The room was quiet. And then, one by one, hands rose in support. The ripple effect spread in hours. Other airlines, watching the news, started prepping their PR teams. Competitors scrambled to review their own complaint systems, quietly pulling records of past discrimination lawsuits. The FAA, facing public pressure, reopened talks about standardizing ethics grading across all carriers. And in the press, Celeste Monroe's face was everywhere. The woman who grounded an airline with one phone call. From disrespected to disruptor, the CEO behind aviation's new moral compass. But she didn't care about the coverage. She cared about Rebecca. At 4:17 p.m., Celeste entered the Skyline crew briefing room. Dozens of staff stood at attention, unsure why they were summoned. Rebecca was among them, pale, shaky, clutching a clipboard. Celeste walked straight to her. You remember me. Rebecca nodded stiffly. Celeste's tone was firm, but not cruel. I'm not here to humiliate you, she said. I'm here because what happened on that flight didn't begin with you, but it ended with you. Rebecca swallowed. You weren't the worst I've seen, but you were the last I'll tolerate. Celeste handed her a letter. Voluntary resignation, with a guaranteed retraining scholarship, should she ever choose to start over. Rebecca began to tear up. Celeste didn't wait. She turned back to the crew. I'm not here to clean up a mess. I'm here to make sure this place never gets dirty again. And with that, she left. That night, across America, an elderly couple in Detroit booked a ticket with Skyline for the first time in years. A disabled veteran in Arizona called to thank the new passenger advocacy office. A teenage girl from Oakland wrote a letter to Celeste saying, My mom said you made it safe for us again. Thank you. Celeste read that letter on her balcony, holding her tea. No headline would ever capture what that moment meant. Not even $1 billion buyout could. Because this wasn't about power. This was about dignity restored. The marble floors of Skyline's headquarters glistened under the morning sun, but the mood inside was anything but bright. In a glass-walled boardroom on the 28th floor, 9 executives sat in pin-drop silence, staring at the glowing screen at the end of the room. On it was a headline they hoped, prayed, was fake. Veritas chairwoman acquires controlling stake in Skyline Air. Major restructuring imminent. The room reeked of desperation. Gregory Stanton, the COO, broke first. He slammed his fist on the polished oak table. Why weren't we informed of this? Where the hell was legal? Where was finance? We thought she was just another investor, the VP of Strategy muttered, sweating through his shirt. She was, growled another board member. Until yesterday. She was in first class just 3 days ago, someone else said under their breath. And then they all went quiet. 3 days ago, that damn flight. It wasn't just about a bad meal anymore. That flight, that one service misstep, served with racial condescension and followed by corporate arrogance, had triggered a chain reaction that would now unravel their empire. Downstairs in the Skyline press room, the media had gathered fast. Word had leaked overnight. Celeste Monroe was in the building. It wasn't just news. It was a reckoning. Cameras were rolling. Anchors were whispering. Someone had already dubbed the morning Skyline's Judgment Day. But Celeste didn't enter through the front. She arrived via the executive elevator, flanked by two Veritas general counsels. She wore no makeup. Her navy coat brushed clean against her black dress. Her presence made the walls feel too small. When she walked into the boardroom, no one stood. They were too stunned. "You've been quiet," she said softly, looking around the table. "Let me guess. You thought I'd sell my stake back." Silence. "I won't. And here's why." She placed a single sheet of paper in front of her. Her voice was calm, but sharp enough to cut glass. 3 days ago, I was served spoiled food by a crew that judged my skin before they asked my name. That wasn't the problem. Gregory flinched. "The problem," she continued, "was that when I filed a complaint, it disappeared. When I followed up, it was denied. And when Veritas asked your team about prior incidents, they stonewalled us. Your entire culture is designed to protect arrogance, not accountability." Someone exhaled shakily. Celeste leaned forward. "I now own 53.2% of Skyline Air." Mouths fell open. "And I intend to clean house." Gregory stood, his face burning red. "You don't understand this business." Celeste didn't flinch. "Correction, you don't understand your customer." She turned to the screen on the wall and tapped it once. A new slide appeared. "Flight Justice Index, mandatory ethics grading for all cabin and ground staff." "This is your new standard," she said. "If you serve passengers with decency, you'll thrive. If you serve them with entitlement, you're done." The CFO's voice cracked. "We'd lose 40% of our current crew." "Then replace them," Celeste replied flatly, "with people who remember what empathy looks like." While the board scrambled for damage control, Celeste moved faster. By noon, she had convened an emergency meeting with all major stakeholders: investors, leasing firms, regulators. "I'm not here to sink Skyline," she told them. "I'm here to reform it, but no change will be cosmetic." Then she unveiled her plan: a full audit of passenger complaints over the past 5 years, public transparency dashboard tracking all cabin crew behavior scores, a customer council led by retired veterans, educators, and advocates to review dignity violations. "From now on," she said, "flying Skyline means being treated like a human being." One investor stood up. "Why are you doing this?" Celeste looked him in the eye. "Because I built Veritas to be a justice engine, not just a capital fund, and I'm tired of systems that punish humility and reward cruelty." The room was quiet, and then, one by one, hands rose in support. The ripple effect spread in hours. Other airlines, watching the news, started prepping their PR teams. Competitors scrambled to review their own complaint systems, quietly pulling records of past discrimination lawsuits. The FAA, facing public pressure, reopened talks about standardizing ethics grading across all carriers. And in the press, Celeste Monroe's face was everywhere. The woman who grounded an airline with one phone call. From disrespected to disruptor, the CEO behind aviation's new moral compass. But she didn't care about the coverage. She cared about Rebecca. At 4:17 p.m., Celeste entered the Skyline crew briefing room. Dozens of staff stood at attention, unsure why they were summoned. Rebecca was among them, pale, shaky, clutching a clipboard. Celeste walked straight to her. "You remember me?" Rebecca nodded stiffly. Celeste's tone was firm, but not cruel. "I'm not here to humiliate you," she said. "I'm here because what happened on that flight didn't begin with you, but it ended with you." Rebecca swallowed. "You weren't the worst I've seen, but you were the last I'll tolerate." Celeste handed her a letter. Voluntary resignation, with a guaranteed retraining scholarship, should she ever choose to start over. Rebecca began to tear up. Celeste didn't wait. She turned back to the crew. "I'm not here to clean up a mess. I'm here to make sure this place never gets dirty again." And with that, she left. That night, across America, an elderly couple in Detroit booked a ticket with Skyline for the first time in years. A disabled veteran in Arizona called to thank the new passenger advocacy office. A teenage girl from Oakland wrote a letter to Celeste saying, "My mom said you made it safe for us again. Thank you." Celeste read that letter on her balcony, holding her tea. No headline would ever capture what that moment meant. Not even a billion-dollar buyout could. Because this wasn't about power. This was about dignity restored. New ban Moon Min Viet Thiep chương 5. Hoặc cần tổng hợp mô tả video, timeline theo phút, hoặc thiết kế thumbnail caption. Hãy cho mình biết ngay nhé. Bạn đã nói, hãy viết chương 5 bám sát dàn ý đã soạn 5, số từ 1.500 từ. Phù hợp với thư viện truyền và thư viện khán giả. Giống tự nhiên như người Mỹ không phải robot viết. ChatGPT đã nói, dưới đây là chương 5 hoàn chỉnh, măn 1.500 từ. Bám sát dàn ý bạn đã soạn. Đúng cấu trúc thư viện truyền và hoàn toàn phù hợp với insight khán giả trung tâm của kênh bạn. Giọng văn tự nhiên, cảm xúc, đúng chất storytelling my. Chapter 5. The dinner that changed everything. 3 days after Celeste Monroe took full control of Skyline Air, she walked into the quiet warmth of the Garden Table, a discreet restaurant in San Francisco's Pacific Heights. She wasn't here for a photo op or for press. She was here for someone who still hadn't answered her last call. Across the room, seated by the window, was Dr. Warren Kingsley, founder of the Ethical Aviation Initiative and Celeste's former professor from Stanford. He stood when he saw her, his frame still lean and commanding despite the gray streaks in his hair. "You still hate making dinner plans," he said with a small smile. Celeste smirked. "Only when they involved talking about me." They sat. A long pause passed between them, filled only by the clink of silverware and the soft hum of jazz overhead. Then Warren leaned forward. "You shook the entire sector. I've had 6 different boards call me since Tuesday. CEOs asking how they can avoid becoming your next target." "I'm not after blood," Celeste replied. "I'm after repair." Warren studied her. "And how much will you give up for that?" Celeste's eyes didn't flinch. "Whatever it takes." He nodded. "Then you'll need to go further." Later that night, they sat outside on the patio, steam curling off their teacups. "That flight," Warren said, "was never just about a meal. It was a mirror. It showed you how much your presence still rattles the system." "I know," she whispered, "but I didn't expect it to feel so familiar." That instant judgment, the condescension masked as policy. Warren gave a long sigh. The industry doesn't fear power. It fears dignity in the hands of people they never thought would hold it. Celeste stared at the night sky. "I'm not done," she said. "Then don't just fix the airline," Warren said. "Fix the code behind it." She turned to him. "What do you mean?" Warren pulled out a worn notebook and placed it on the table. Inside was something he'd once tried to push 20 years ago, a universal ethics framework for aviation service providers, ground crew, flight attendants, pilots, terminal staff. It was rejected by every major airline back then, he said. Too disruptive. Celeste flipped through it. Her breath caught on a page titled Passenger Dignity Protocol, Tiered Intervention Model. This could change everything, Warren nodded. With Veritas and Skyline backing it, it won't be just a suggestion. It'll be an industry mandate. She looked up. Then let's start. The very next morning, Celeste summoned her new interim operations team. The group included former Delta executives, independent watchdogs, and a surprising new face. Grace Pineda, a 22-year-old disability rights activist who had gone viral last year after being forced to crawl off a plane when no ramp was provided. Celeste opened the meeting with a whiteboard and wrote just 4 words. Dignity is a standard. Then she turned to the group. I don't want a nice airline. I want a just one. The hours that followed were electric. New onboarding policies that include cultural competency and emotional de-escalation. Crew evaluations weighted not only by punctuality or service speed, but by compassion metrics from real passengers. A live dashboard displayed in each staff lounge, showing individual and team dignity scores, updated weekly. A new hotline, not for complaints, but for praise, where passengers could highlight exceptional kindness, giving those employees extra bonuses. The name of the initiative? Project Onyx, a nod to both the strength of the stone and the elegance of leadership under pressure. Within 48 hours, the rollout hit national news. CNN, Forbes, the New York Times. Monroe redefines the skies. Project Onyx launches at Skyline. Not just first class, now there's first character. The public response was overwhelming. Parents, veterans, students, and elders across the country flooded Skyline's new feedback portal, not just with complaints, but with thanks. One elderly woman from Birmingham wrote, "Your new crew reminded me what flying used to feel like being welcomed, not weighed and judged." A high school teacher from Newark sent in a video of her autistic student being greeted with patience and joy by a flight attendant who had just completed the new Onyx training. It went viral. Celeste didn't repost it. She just sent flowers. But not everyone was thrilled. A group of legacy employees, backed by old guard unions, tried to resist. They called the new scoring system invasive, subjective, and dangerous. Celeste didn't silence them. Instead, she invited 5 of the loudest critics to dinner, just like Warren once did with her. And she listened. "Some of us have been flying for 30 years, one of them said. "We're not bad people, but it's hard to change everything overnight." "I'm not asking you to," Celeste said. "I'm asking you to remember why you started." They were quiet. Then she added, "This isn't a punishment. It's a mirror, and mirrors help us fix what we can't see." By the end of the night, 3 of them signed up for voluntary retraining. The other 2? They quietly transferred out the following month. On the eve of Project Onyx's full deployment, Celeste sat alone in the flight simulator room at Skyline's training center. Her assistant, Ava, peeked in. "Ma'am, there's a letter." Celeste opened the envelope. It was handwritten. From Rebecca, the woman who served her the spoiled food that started it all. "I left aviation, but I started volunteering at a senior center. They asked me to run empathy workshops. I thought of you. Thank you for not ending me, for helping me begin." Celeste smiled softly. She didn't need applause. She just needed that. By the following week, the ripple of Project Onyx had become a wave. At SkyWest, a partner airline of Skyline, several junior crew members staged a walkout, demanding similar reforms and transparency in passenger complaint handling. Local news outlets spun it as a labor disruption, but Celeste knew better. It wasn't rebellion. It was resonance. From Boston to Denver, training centers scrambled to analyze the Onyx protocols. Other CEOs began issuing statements, some vague, some defensive, a few openly dismissive. The old guard called it a PR move. The new world called it long overdue. And Celeste? She stayed quiet. No interviews, no panel discussions. She let the work speak. Until one unexpected call came through. The Department of Transportation. The meeting was behind closed doors in D.C., inside a marble-clad conference room near Union Station. At the long mahogany table sat figures from FAA, TSA, DOT, and even Department of Labor. The Deputy Secretary leaned forward. "Ms. Monroe, we've received over 14,000 unique submissions from passengers citing Skyline's new ethics program, most of it's praise." Celeste didn't smile. She knew what came next. But the sheer scale of this reaction, it's disrupting multiple service chains, Other carriers are demanding clarity. Unions are demanding oversight. We need to know, are you planning to expand this beyond your own fleet? She met his gaze calmly. I'm not forcing anything, she said. I'm proving it works. And if the public begins expecting this as the new normal, then maybe the old normal should retire. A silence swept the room. Then the director of civil aviation policy, an older black woman with silver curls and sharp eyes, spoke. I flew with Skyline last week. Incognito. Your new policies didn't just change service, they changed the atmosphere. That's rare. She folded her hands. I want you to draft a proposal. If we can codify pieces of Project Onyx, we may explore a federal recommendation, maybe even funding for adoption sector-wide. It wasn't a guarantee, but it was a door. And Celeste, she was ready to walk through. Back in San Francisco, Skyline's internal board was panicking again. Not because of Onyx, but because of Wall Street. Skyline stock had surged 23%. Investors once skeptical of Celeste's leadership were now pouring in. ESG, environmental, social, governance funds began listing the company as a top ethical pick. Several board members who had once plotted her removal now scrambled to take credit for her reforms. But she didn't give them that chance. At the next board meeting, Celeste stood and handed out a sealed folder to each member. Inside was a 6-month roadmap, a plan to transition all staff evaluations to the Onyx system, a partnership with Stanford's Behavioral Ethics Lab to monitor real-time feedback integrity, and most importantly, a proposal to create the industry's first Ethics and Passenger Dignity Council, chaired independently and with public access. Skyline will not just be a brand, she said. It will be a benchmark. The vote, unanimous. Even the ones who doubted her, especially them. Then came the backlash from outside. An anonymously leaked memo from the CEO of Transconti Air, one of Skyline's main competitors, called Project Onyx a threat to operational pragmatism and accused Celeste of emotionalizing logistics. Within hours, #emotionalize this was trending on Twitter. Instead of responding with fire, Celeste posted a single sentence on her verified account. Human dignity is not a logistics issue. It was retweeted 1.2 million times in 36 hours. 3 nights later, Celeste stood on her rooftop balcony, watching planes drift across the sky above the bay. Her goddaughter, Maya, just turned 17, sat beside her, finishing an essay on her laptop. Are you okay? Maya asked quietly. Celeste exhaled. Tired, but okay. Maya looked up. You know, when I flew last week, the flight attendant saw my name on the ticket and asked if I was related to you. Celeste raised an eyebrow. What'd you say? I said, not exactly, but she said to tell you thanks anyway. Said you helped her remember why she took the job. Celeste stared at the skyline, the lights reflecting on the dark water. You think it's enough? She asked. Nope, Maya said. Celeste laughed. But it's the first time someone's tried, Maya added. That landed deep. Celeste put an arm around her, and for the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to rest. Not because the fight was over, but because the system had flinched and hadn't quite stood back up. Yet. 5 weeks after the launch of Project Onyx, the aviation world was in chaos, though not in the way anyone expected. It wasn't canceled flights or angry unions. It wasn't even lawsuits. It was silence. A deep, nervous silence from the top floor of every major airline headquarters. Because Celeste Monroe, the CEO they once brushed off as overreaching, had just delivered an unthinkable blow. Veritas Equity, the global investment firm she co-chaired, had frozen $2.4 billion in aviation sector funding, not just for Skyline's competitors, but for any airline that refused to meet the new Passenger Dignity Compliance Standard. Celeste had rolled out. That meant airlines could no longer access expansion loans, route development funds, or tech upgrades unless they proved, through real, auditable metrics, that they were treating passengers like people, not problems. This wasn't a press release. It was financial warfare, and it was working. The day the freeze hit, Skynova Airlines lost a $480 million expansion deal with Dubai International. Airlux was forced to halt its premium lounge renovations across Europe. Even global giants like Transconti Air saw their credit ratings quietly downgraded, without a word from Celeste. Behind closed doors, boardrooms exploded with confusion and fury. "She's blacklisting us, without ever saying our names," one VP of operations shouted in a closed-door call. "She's not blacklisting," replied the CFO. "She's benchmarking." And every airline knew it, because as Skyline's public ratings climbed and its stock kept soaring, one uncomfortable truth began to emerge. Celeste wasn't punishing the industry. She was replacing its spine. Inside Skyline's newly renovated Ethics and Dignity Council room, Celeste paced quietly. She was on the phone with Rebecca Alston, the same flight attendant who'd served her that spoiled meal. Now, Rebecca had been quietly reinstated, not in service, but in training design. She'd spent weeks reviewing footage, interviews, and logs of crew behavior to help shape a new curriculum that didn't just teach manners. It taught awareness. "I never knew how much I'd internalized," Rebecca admitted over the call. "I thought I was just doing my job. Turns out I was repeating a culture I never agreed to." Celeste listened. "Thank you for saying that," she replied. "Most people hide behind policy. You chose to step in front of it." They ended the call with a strange sense of closure, one that didn't need a public apology, just personal evolution. That had always been Celeste's real mission. Not revenge. Redirection. But the final act wasn't done yet. 2 days later, Celeste received a call from Congresswoman Deborah Langston. Langston chaired the subcommittee on transportation equity, and she wasn't calling for chit-chat. "We want you in D.C. next month," she said bluntly. "There's talk of drafting a Passenger Fairness Act, and the ethics scoring model you've piloted might be the base." Celeste didn't answer immediately. She knew what this meant. If Project Onyx moved from private sector to public law, the backlash would be brutal. Lobbyists, conservative watchdog groups, even legacy unions would scream about government overreach. But she also knew one thing. This was how reform survived. Not in headlines, in hard laws. "I'll be there," she said. In the lead-up to her DC testimony, Celeste went quiet publicly. No interviews, no press events. But behind the scenes, her team was busy. They compiled a 72-page white paper with live case studies from Skyline flights, anonymized but verifiable. The results were impossible to ignore. Incidents of in-flight passenger conflict had dropped 41%. Crew attrition had dropped 22% due to morale improvements. Passenger satisfaction scores rose by 39 points, with spikes among elderly, disabled, and minority travelers. The numbers didn't shout. They whispered something powerful. "This works." On the morning of the hearing, Celeste stepped into the Capitol chamber wearing a dark navy suit and a lapel pin shaped like a passenger boarding pass. She wasn't there to play politics. She was there to hold up a mirror. Her opening statement was simple. Air travel used to be a wonder. Now, it's often a wound. But wounds can be treated, not with policy alone, but with principle. Gasps? No. But there were nods, even from those who'd expected to challenge her. When the questioning began, one congressman tried to derail her. "Ms. Monroe, how can we possibly quantify dignity? It's a feeling, not a metric." Celeste didn't flinch. "We quantify delays. We quantify baggage weight. We even quantify fuel efficiency. Are you telling me we can optimize every technical variable in flight, but not human decency?" The room fell silent. Later, when the final vote came to advance the framework to committee, it passed 9-2. It wasn't law yet, but it was landing. That night, back in her DC hotel room, Celeste stood barefoot at the window, sipping tea. A knock came. Her assistant Ava opened the door and passed her a note, no name on the envelope. Inside, a card read, "My mother was on your flight that day. She has dementia. You helped fix a system that didn't see her. Thank you." Celeste closed her eyes. She thought of every passenger who'd been dismissed, doubted, degraded. This was for them, but also for every flight crew member who wanted to do better and never knew how. She whispered to the quiet, "This time, the skies remember." 2 weeks after Celeste Monroe's testimony shook Capitol Hill, the skies felt different. Not louder, not calmer, just awake. Airports reported something odd. Fewer complaints. Not zero, but fewer. Flight attendants were noticing more passengers making eye contact, saying thank you, even helping each other with overhead bins. It was almost like people believed something had changed, and it had. The House committee had officially moved forward with the Passenger Dignity Act proposal, adopting the Onyx framework as its blueprint. Celeste's model, once mocked as too idealistic, was now the basis of federal aviation reform. It was unprecedented, and it was only beginning. Celeste sat at her office in San Francisco, facing 3 massive monitors, each displaying a different set of live metrics. One showed daily ethics compliance across 14 participating airlines. Another tracked incident trends by airport and crew region. And the third? A real-time passenger dignity heat map, pulled from voluntary app submissions around the country. Green meant safe. Yellow meant strained. Red meant broken. She noticed a sudden red flare at Dallas-Fort Worth International. She clicked it. An elderly woman in a wheelchair had been left at the jet bridge unattended for 42 minutes. Her daughter, outraged, uploaded a photo and tagged the new Passenger Dignity Council hotline. Celeste forwarded it directly to the oversight team. 15 minutes later, the station manager was on video call with the woman and her daughter, apologizing, explaining, and most importantly, fixing it. That used to take weeks, sometimes months. Now, 15 minutes. Later that evening, Celeste joined a private dinner with CEOs from 3 of the top 5 airlines. She didn't wear a power suit. She wore calm. "We didn't come here to argue," said the CEO of Aero Continental. "We came to learn how you made the public trust you again." Celeste sipped her water. "I didn't." They paused. She clarified. "I didn't ask for their trust. I asked for their feedback. I made it easy to hear and painful to ignore." One executive frowned. "But what if your metrics are weaponized by social media? You're giving power to people who don't know our industry." "No," she replied gently. "I'm giving it back to the ones we forgot we serve." By the end of dinner, the CEOs agreed to test Onyx Lite across selected routes. It wasn't full commitment, but it was momentum. And in systems like aviation, momentum is revolution. The next morning, as the sun broke over the Pacific, Celeste stood at Skyline's Crew Training Center, a graduation ceremony for the latest flight attendant class. The speaker, a young man named Elijah Brown, stepped up to the mic. His voice shook. "When I was 12, I watched a flight attendant yell at my grandma for moving too slow in the aisle. I remember thinking, I wish someone would speak up." He paused. "Today, I get to be that someone." The crowd erupted. Celeste didn't clap right away. She just closed her eyes, letting it wash over her. This wasn't about her. It never had been. It was about making sure Elijah never had to watch that happen again and do nothing. It was about multiplying courage. By week's end, Skyline was awarded the National Passenger Advocacy Gold Standard, a designation created specifically in response to the Onyx system. And then came the email from the UN Council on Ethical Infrastructure. Subject line: Invitation to Present, Civil Ethics in Mass Transit. They weren't just talking airplanes anymore. They were talking everywhere people moved. Buses, trains, ferries, even cruise lines. Celeste stared at the screen, stunned for a moment. Her phone buzzed. It was Maya, her goddaughter. The message read, "You said you wanted the skies to change. Guess you're changing the whole map." Celeste smiled, then hit reply, accept. That weekend, back at home, Celeste hosted a quiet dinner with close friends and her team. No press, no formal wear, just real people in real clothes, telling stories. Her CFO leaned in at one point. "You know, I thought you were nuts when you froze the $2.4 billion. I even drafted my resignation letter." Celeste raised an eyebrow. "What changed your mind?" He grinned. "The returns and the respect." Everyone laughed, but deep inside, Celeste felt something quieter. Relief. Not because she won, but because she hadn't folded. Not when the food was spoiled. Not when the headlines mocked her. Not when the system pushed back. She held. And now, it was holding with her. As the night wrapped, Celeste stepped outside, barefoot on the stone patio, the stars watching silently above. A breeze swept through and she whispered, "If you're out there, if you ever felt like no one noticed." She paused. "They do now." And somewhere, on some red-eye flight, a child would be offered a warm blanket without a sigh. Somewhere, a mother would be allowed to sit beside her son in a wheelchair without begging. Somewhere, someone who looked like Celeste Monroe would be treated with grace, not suspicion. And that would be enough, for now. And you, you watching this, what's one moment where you wish someone had stood up for you? Tell us where you're watching from. We're listening. 3 days before the official rollout of the federal Onyx framework, Celeste Monroe boarded a red-eye flight from Seattle to DC. No press, no entourage, just her, a slim briefcase, and the quiet hum of a first-class cabin she had once been humiliated in. The irony wasn't lost on her. She leaned back in her seat, eyes closed, when a young flight attendant approached, early 20s, eager, maybe a little nervous. "Ms. Monroe, I just wanted to say, thank you. My mom's a cleaner at O'Hare. She said because of you, her supervisors finally listen now." Celeste looked up, her expression softening. "Tell her I said thank you for keeping the floors under us clean while we looked the other way." The young woman blinked, caught off guard. "I will." Landing in DC at 5:42 a.m., Celeste was met by a small federal escort. Nothing flashy, just a single unmarked SUV and a staffer from the Department of Transportation who clearly hadn't slept. They drove straight to the Eisenhower Executive Office building. Waiting inside, 3 senators, the Secretary of Transportation, and a video call linked to the President's policy team. This wasn't a hearing. This was an inflection point. Senator Lorraine Keller from New York leaned in first. "Ms. Monroe, the metrics don't lie. Passenger reports are down. Staff morale is up. Investor confidence has rebounded. The public wants this standardized." Celeste nodded. "Then we build it into law." But it wasn't that simple. Senator Reed from Texas, old school and skeptical, rubbed his temples. "My concern, frankly, is cost. Airlines say implementation could drain their thin margins. You're asking them to become moral compasses in the air." Celeste's tone stayed steady. "I'm asking them to treat dignity as infrastructure. You don't build runways and ignore how people land on them." A pause. The Secretary of Transportation, a middle-aged Latino man with a calm presence, finally broke the tension. "We've run our own numbers. The cost is manageable. What's more expensive is the lawsuits and the shame." Celeste passed around a printed binder. It was clean, tight. Onyx 360. Inside, a 24-month phased adoption timeline, a cross-sector feedback loop, and a federal incentive plan for early compliance. Senator Keller nodded. "You're not just fixing flying. You're fixing trust." Celeste gave a half smile. "I'm just making it easier not to break it." As she left the meeting, her phone buzzed. It was an encrypted line. From Zurich, the Veritas Fund Board. The chairwoman, an elegant woman in her 60s, came on. Celeste, the European Commission just approved the Onyx expansion across EU-based airlines. Lufthansa and Air France are requesting consults. Celeste stood in the marble hallway, gripping the phone tighter. "Make it global," she said. The woman on the line chuckled. Already happening. Back in San Francisco that evening, the sun dipped behind the bay as Celeste walked into Skyline's new Onyx operations hub. It had been redesigned from scratch. No cubicles, no hierarchy. Just a round open floor where flight data, passenger insights, and ethical performance scores pulsed across curved screens. She stopped by a workstation where an analyst was adjusting flight sentiment readings from a delayed flight in Miami. "Why the spike?" Celeste asked. The analyst blinked, surprised to see her. "Oh, passengers were upset at the delay, but one of the flight attendants handed out handwritten apology cards with snack vouchers. It flipped the vibe." Celeste nodded slowly. "Kindness scales, if you give it space." And then she turned. To the far end of the hub was a soundproofed room labeled simply Redacted. Inside, a dedicated ethics AI built on Project Onyx was running simulations for routes in Asia Pacific, with Celeste's voice as part of its training model. Her image, her cadence, her standards. It had begun. Her legacy was becoming code. Later that night at home, Celeste stood in her kitchen reheating leftover tomato soup. No staff, no calls, just quiet. Her goddaughter Maya walked in, barefoot, holding a physics textbook. "Why are you still up? Why are you still holding that book?" Maya grinned. "Test tomorrow." Celeste chuckled. "You'll pass. You're stubborn." Maya nodded. "Like you?" Celeste leaned against the counter. "Maya, this thing I started, it wasn't just about planes." Maya tilted her head. "I know. It was about what happens when people stop assuming the system is too big to change." Maya closed the book. "So, what happens next?" Celeste looked out the window. "We make sure no one forgets it ever changed at all." The terminal at JFK buzzed with quiet urgency. A storm was rolling in. Passengers gathered at Gate 34 for Skyline Flight 729 to London Heathrow, a red-eye packed with diplomats, CEOs, and families. Boarding began as usual, but on this night, something was different. As each first-class passenger stepped on board, they weren't greeted with the usual transactional smile. Instead, each attendant stood taller, warmer, eyes steady, no scripts, no fakeness, just presence. The head purser, a veteran of 20 years, was holding a small card in her hand. Not a boarding pass, a letter, handwritten by Celeste Monroe. Each senior crew member had received one. Inside was a simple reminder. You are not the last resort. You are the first impression. Dignity doesn't cost, it returns. And they felt it. This wasn't just a flight. This was a field test. The first Onyx-certified international route. All metrics would be tracked live. Passenger behavior, staff response time, accessibility adherence, emotional atmosphere. For the next 7 hours, Flight 729 wasn't just crossing the Atlantic, it was crossing a new threshold. Meanwhile, in a quiet control room at the Onyx hub in San Francisco, Celeste watched the heat map pulse in real time. Every 30 seconds, feedback flowed in, green bars, yellow alerts, sentiment spikes, micro-interactions. One flagged moment. A toddler began to cry in seat 3A. Instead of a scolding glance, the man in 3B, a tech exec, handed over his noise-canceling earbuds. The sentiment index jumped by +3. Another moment. A black woman in 7D requested warm milk for her elderly mother. The attendant paused, then offered to heat it herself in the galley. +5 impact score. These moments had always existed. Now they were measured, amplified, protected. By sunrise over London, the flight had logged 0 incidents, 97% passenger satisfaction, and the highest empathy index Skyline had ever recorded. Celeste smiled softly. It wasn't just a system anymore. It was a standard. Later that week, Celeste took the stage at the Global Aviation Ethics Summit in Geneva. She wasn't flashy. She wore no makeup, just a black blouse and soft gray slacks. Her hair pulled back, calm, deliberate. Behind her, a screen displaying 3 simple words. Passenger, human, system. She began. We built airlines to move people faster. Then we built systems to keep them safer. But somewhere along the way, we forgot to build trust. I'm not here to accuse the past. I'm here to build a future. One where your grandmother doesn't need to fight for dignity. One where a child doesn't get called a threat. One where the color of your skin doesn't decide the tone of your service. It's not just about racism or classism. It's about the assumption of who matters and who doesn't. The room was silent, then thunderous. After her speech, 19 airlines signed pledges to join the Onyx standard within the next fiscal year, and quietly, behind closed doors, 4 more whispered they'd begun testing it without announcing, just in case. Change was spreading. That evening, Celeste returned home to a rare silence. She poured herself a glass of tea, sat by her window, and looked out over the bay. Her phone buzzed. An anonymous message. Just 4 words. Flight 729 was different. No name, no contact, just truth. And that was enough. Because change wasn't just coming from boardrooms or summits. It was already in the aisles. 2 weeks after Flight 729, something unexpected happened. Not a scandal, not a PR disaster. Something quieter, deeper. It started with a memo leaked to the press. A 5-page internal report from Skyline Air's Legacy Operations Division, detailing a decade-long pattern of internal complaints that had been quietly settled or ignored. Mistreatment of elderly passengers, racially coded service notes, manipulated evaluations, and perhaps most damning, repeated non-compliance with in-flight dignity protocols, flagged but never enforced. The leak hit every major news outlet by noon, but by 2 p.m., another story eclipsed it. Celeste Monroe responded, publicly, and with receipts. She walked onto a makeshift press podium at Skyline's headquarters. No prep, no PR handler, just her. And opened a black folder. Inside were authenticated audio logs, internal emails, and compliance data sets from the past 2 years. In her signature calm voice, she began, "Some will say I'm breaching trust, but I never agreed to be silent. I agreed to be just." Behind her, a screen lit up with an animated data map. Red dots, green zones, blacked out corridors of behavior. The story was no longer about one bad meal in first class. It was about an entire culture of rot. Her team called it the shadow route, a pattern where certain demographic passengers were systematically given worse treatment, then labeled problematic for pushing back. Celeste didn't shout. She didn't accuse individuals. She exposed systems, and systems trembled. By midnight, 2 airline executives stepped down. By morning, 3 former flight supervisors were under investigation. By the end of the week, the FAA launched a joint oversight task force, using Celeste's Onyx Index as the baseline framework. A quiet revolution had just gone public. Not everyone was on board. Old guard executives from rival airlines accused Celeste of corporate sabotage. One former board member claimed she was weaponizing morality for profit. Celeste didn't flinch. She released her full compensation package to the public, showing she had relinquished all bonuses tied to Onyx performance, placing every dollar into the Passenger Dignity Innovation Grant, now funded at $25,000. "I won't earn off what was stolen," she said. The public rallied. Passengers, nurses, janitors, veterans, young black kids who'd once been ignored at boarding gates. One tweet went viral. She didn't fire the crew, she fired the silence. In a symbolic gesture, Celeste returned to the very airport where it had all begun. Terminal C, Gate 11, Seattle International. The gate that once served her spoiled food, that humiliated her without hesitation. She boarded Flight 332, the same route, the same time slot, now rebranded as a Monroe route under the Onyx standard. This time, she wasn't alone. Beside her sat her goddaughter Maya, now shadowing her for a school project. Across the aisle, a retired Latina school principal and her wife. Every seat had a story. Every attendant had been trained under the new Ethics First model. Not just procedures, but emotional intelligence, cross-cultural service, trauma-informed de-escalation. And the difference? It wasn't dramatic. It was human. No one flinched when the elderly couple took a little longer to settle in. No one whispered when a young black teen wore headphones and didn't make eye contact. No one rolled their eyes when the autistic boy in row 3 needed help understanding the safety card. Because everyone had learned the new language of flight. Respect before reason. Dignity before data. As the plane leveled above 30,000 feet, Celeste took a quiet breath. Maya leaned over. "Do you ever get tired of fighting?" Celeste paused, looked out the window. The clouds below looked soft, like silk folded on itself. "Every day," she admitted. "But then I remember, somebody's up here, right now, feeling like they don't belong, just like I did." Maya nodded. "But they'll never know you helped fix it." Celeste smiled. "They don't have to." A beat of silence. Then Maya asked, "What if Onyx disappears one day?" Celeste answered without turning her head. "Then someone like you will build something better." By the time they landed, the Monroe route had received a 99.2% satisfaction rating, and the FAA issued a statement commending its model implementation of future-forward dignity standards. But Celeste didn't celebrate. She simply walked down the jet bridge, head high, bag in hand, as if nothing had happened. Because that was the point. When justice works, it looks invisible. No fanfare, just flight. It had been 93 days since the spoiled meal. 93 days since Celeste Monroe sat quietly in first class, accepted the moldy ravioli, and let the taste of neglect sit on her tongue without protest. And yet, here she was, at the unveiling of Monroe Air. The press swarmed the renovated terminal, newly renamed the Dignity Hall at San Francisco International. The wall behind the podium shimmered with brushed steel, bearing the emblem of a phoenix rising through circling flight paths, the new logo of the rebranded airline. A voice crackled through the overhead. "Now boarding, those willing to rewrite the rules." It wasn't part of any standard announcement, it was a declaration. The ceremony began not with executives or champagne, but with a reading. A young man, perhaps 16, stepped up to the mic. He was a former passenger, once labeled difficult, on a red-eye to Detroit when he simply asked for a blanket 3 times. He read from Celeste's first public memo. "The sky doesn't forget who we let fall. The sky remembers silence. Let's give it something else to remember. How we rose." Then came Celeste. She didn't wear a power suit. She wore a pilot's jacket, one worn by her late father, a Tuskegee airman, whose service medals had been hidden for decades. As she stepped forward, applause began. Slowly, then thundered. She waited, then spoke. "You don't change an airline by changing uniforms. You change it by changing what people expect from each other. I didn't set out to become a CEO. I set out to not be dismissed, not be degraded, not be the quiet apology in someone else's day." She looked out over the crowd. "We built Monroe Air to be more than a business. It's a witness to what's possible when silence ends." The new airline's mission went beyond branding. Every plane had a passenger advocacy officer on board. Every terminal had real-time empathy dashboards displayed alongside flight times. And every staff member went through quarterly Onyx certification, not as punishment, but as pride. On opening day, Monroe Air released its first annual transparency report, listing every incident of service failure, staff redemption, and policy revision. Unfiltered, unedited, radical honesty. The response? Overwhelming support. Yes, there were critics, talking heads who called it overcorrection or empathy theater. But bookings surged, and letters poured in from parents, veterans, immigrants, even former crew members who'd once been part of the problem but now asked to be part of the solution. Weeks later, on a quiet Thursday evening, Celeste received a handwritten note. No signature, just a memory. Flight 227, I served you that meal. I looked you in the eye and chose not to care. I am sorry. I now teach Onyx onboarding in Memphis. You didn't just fire the crew, you freed the crew I could have been. She held the letter for a long time, not with anger, with relief. Because the point was never revenge. It was release. Late one evening, Celeste walked the quiet tarmac alone. The lights along the runway blinked like pulse beats. Her assistant had offered a cart. She declined. She reached gate A17, where one of the first Monroe Air flights was set to board. A woman in her 60s sat in a wheelchair, alone, waiting. Celeste approached gently. First time flying with us? The woman looked up, her eyes crinkled. First time flying in 20 years. May I ask why now? The woman took a breath. Because my granddaughter said this airline wouldn't forget me. Celeste smiled. She was right. She knelt down, gently placed her hand over the woman's and said, "Let's make this flight worth remembering." As the plane lifted off into the velvet sky, Celeste stood alone on the tarmac, watching its taillights disappear into the clouds, not as a CEO, but as a witness. The sky had remembered the pain. Now it would remember the change. If this story gave you chills, or gave you hope, share it with someone who's ever felt invisible in a place meant to carry them. We rise together.